There's been a lot of discussion and clarifications proffered over the Finance Ministry's granting of a special exemption for Eskom from some provisions of the Public Finance Management Act. Professor Peter Goss, a corporate governance expert, joins us now to provide more clarity on this development and to examine whether this promotes accountability or cover for wrongdoing. Professor Goss, good evening to you and welcome. I think as an opener, a summary of the purpose of the PFMA would be a good place to start. Welcome.
Thank you. The essence of the PFMA, Iman, is that it is about the regulating of financial management in the national and provincial government sphere. Now, expand that to financial governance in corporate governance. Corporate governance has four fundamental headline characteristics or headline principles. Those are responsibility, fairness, transparency, very important, and accountability. These are headline principles for corporate governance around the world. You'll find them in the G20 OECD corporate governance principles for all kinds of organizations. You'll also find it in the new international standard ISO 37000 for the governance of all kinds of organizations. So transparency and accountability are at the center of this. The PFMA allows for exemptions in terms of Section 92 to be applied for to the Minister of Finance under certain circumstances. This particular exemption creates cause for alarm. And the cause for alarm is it tries to exempt Eskom from disclosing in its financial statements certain material losses as a result of criminal conduct, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. What's strange is that this will still be disclosed in the annual report because this provision in law is together, it's in one section. Section 54 deals with annual reports and financial statements in one sentence, literally. So this effort to avoid disclosing in the financial statements for me is troubling from the perspective of ethical leadership and the challenge for Eskom in illustrating ethical leadership, something it has a dire need for right now.
Well, we were told by the Treasury that this is so Eskom can aim for a clean audit, keep its public nose clean for auditors and investors. But if, as you've just pointed out again and has been pointed out, it still has to play open cards in its annual report, what's the point?
Exactly. I just don't get the point wherein the section provides for annual report and financial statements having certain disclosures. And one of those disclosures is material loss as a result of criminal conduct, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. So you will still disclose this in the annual report. So the argument that not disclosing it in the financial statements places a lesser burden on Eskom, I think we're bordering on misstatement here. We're bordering on irregular financial misstatement. Now, international standards will catch this anyway because Eskom is audited in terms of international financial reporting standards anyway. So I don't think we should trouble ourselves that these disclosures will have to be made in the integrated annual report that Eskom issues every year, and it will be audited. So if they think that this will improve their prospects of getting by the rating agencies, I think they've got another thing coming for them. I don't think they'll get by the ratings agencies about the integrity of their financial statements just by not making this particular disclosure in the financial statements. I think nothing's going to change for Eskom insofar as its financial reporting is concerned. It might not record this, but it will still be audited by the Auditor General in the annual reports and any other reports Eskom issues of a public nature.
Would it be presumptuous to state, Peter, that this, A, it's counterintuitive, and B, it just makes, this whole arena of accountability, especially with the heightened interest and kind of focus on Eskom, just make things worse?
You have these private, and they use the argument that in the private sector, this obligation would not be an obligation. This is exactly why you have massive collapses like Steinhoff and Tongaat Hulett, where efforts are made to technically bypass provisions of law. And I think that Eskom is bordering on a very fine line here in comparing itself to the private sector. Eskom is a public entity. Can you imagine, Iman, that this provision, this kind of exemption be granted? Why can't it now be granted to any kind of entity that falls under the ambit of the PFMA? That's the next point, is why can't it be granted now to any other organization that falls under the ambit of the PFMA? I think they're going to have difficulty not giving it to everybody at some point in time.
Well, it leads to this other question, right? That, besides, as you say, it could open the door for everyone who is accountable under the PFMA, but also could it create just a kind of negative trend amongst the SOEs? I mean, we saw Transnet receiving a similar exemption, and it seems to run for a 3-year period, similar thing that we're seeing now with Eskom. Is this a dangerous road we're heading down?
It's a dangerous path to go down. So here's my question. The PFMA has been in place since 1999. What's the burning platform now insofar as credit agencies and rating agencies and international functionality of Eskom? Eskom functions in international markets. What's changed right now? Nothing has changed for Eskom. So this little subtle manipulation is not healthy for the country. In the context of coming out of the state capture debacles, the state capture reporting, I don't think it's good timing for this kind of move to bypass laws for the sake of convenience. The Public Finance Management Act was created to improve the quality of financial governance in the public sector. Allowing this kind of exemption is dangerous for the future and for governance.
Here's the other thing that you've pointed out, which I'd like for us to elaborate on. Banks and ratings agencies will know that there are red flags. You've already said you don't see the benefit of doing this. Does it provide actual cover for criminality? I mean, if you look back at Eskom's 2020-21 financial, their audit, they got a qualified audit, and there was a litany of failed financial controls, which essentially painted this picture of failed governance. They couldn't keep track of pretty much everything. And part of the whole reason of not granting the exemption is to keep the transparency open so we can see where the money's going and who's behind the losses instead of looking for it in another place.
To be fair, there's no cover-up that can possibly happen in the current dispensation despite the exemption. Because the annual report, the annual integrated report, will still report these types of transactions, material losses as a result of criminal conduct, irregular, wasteful, fruitless expenditure will still be reported in the annual report. So they can't bypass the law. I don't think that this is the effort. I think that for me, the ethical dilemma here is this exemption being granted about a matter which will in any case be reported in another annual report, another disclosure report, which is the annual integrated report of Eskom. So there's no prospect that anything can be covered up in this case.
Is there anything we're missing in the way that we are approaching the question around this exemption, Peter, that you can share with us?
I think we're missing out on the principle of ethical leadership in corporate governance. One of the fundamental tenets of good corporate governance is ethical leadership. Part of that ethical leadership is transparency. Part of that ethical leadership is accountability by those who should be accountable, in particular, in this case, the board of Eskom. So the ultimate guardian of governance in an organization is the board of Eskom. Seeking this particular exemption for me raises questions about ethical leadership. Eskom's desire to be transparent and Eskom's desire to be accountable.
And certainly a reputational risk that they cannot afford to take at this particular moment. Professor Peter Goss, thank you for your time and for your analysis and expertise. We appreciate it. Peter Goss is a corporate governance expert.